what are the next generation of reforms we should think about. So the last 30 years of reforms have all been about withdrawing the government from things it should not do. And while we haven't finished that agenda, at least most of that has now been announced, I would argue. And I think with the exception maybe of direct taxes, where we still need to really get our act together, we have mostly done all the large framework reforms, at least announced our intentions, whether it's privatization, where privatization may not have, it's a process that has far from finished, but at least you know where we are going with it. Labor reforms, even farm reforms, we may have held it in abeyance, but you know that we are committed to a particular direction of movement. But the next generation of reforms is not about withdrawal of the Indian state. It is about getting the Indian state to do the things it should do. So from getting away from things it should not do, now the next 30 years should be about getting the Indian state to do the things it should do. So what are those things? Well, very high up in that list has got to be the ability of our legal system to deliver justice and enforce contracts. If you're living in an uncertain world, then you obviously means that things will go wrong. And if things go wrong, you need to be able to enforce contracts for the situations where things go wrong. So seen from this complexity and uncertainty prism, which is the economics I espouse, legal system reform is the single biggest issue that we need to pursue. Now you can debate on how to go about it, and that's a different lecture, but you can be clear that having 40 million cases stuck in the pipeline is not only a travesty of justice, it is also deadly for the economic model that I just described. So it must be fixed. The same thing is true for administrative reforms. With the economic model that I just described, you cannot have a administrative system and bureaucracy of the kind we have, not merely because of all the endemic rent seeking that all of you probably have to face, but also the sheer lethargy of a system that is based on not on principles, but on precedent and blind following of outdated rules. We need to update those rules on a routine basis through a feedback loop. We need systems where we encourage our bureaucracy to be able to use their common sense and deal with situations in first principle basis rather than blindly perpetuating old ideas. And this is an important thing because, very often the Indian bureaucracy very proudly thinks of itself as the steel frame of India. The fact is that steel frame is only a useful thing if you're thinking in Newtonian terms and you're thinking of the world and of economic systems as rigid frameworks, and therefore you need a rigid system to deal with it. On the other hand, if you think in complexity theory terms as fluid systems, then you can see that the bureaucracy, far from being a steel frame, is basically a rusting cage. It needs to be opened up in order to be able to allow innovation, risk-taking, and entrepreneurship. That should be the real driver of growth. And I always say that we don't have to wait for the GDP growth numbers from 10 years hence to know whether we succeeded. We can very quickly tell whether we are succeeding and the system is moving in the correct direction from simply talking to our teenagers. Ask them what they want to be when they want to grow up. If they want to grow up and want to be civil servants, then we haven't made progress. If they, on the other hand, want to be sportsmen, entrepreneurs, scientists, writers, then we are making progress because they want to do things that are risk-taking. That means we have entered into an era where that is the dominant culture of our society is one of risk-taking, as opposed to wanting to join some sort of a rent-seeking activity. So that will be far before we get the GDP number read. You will be able to see that whether or not our economy is moving in the correct direction from the feedback that you will get from our teenagers.